And without further ado, I'd like to welcome one of our most amazing mentors and somebody who I get to call one of my mentors here at Ask a Chief of Staff, Rebecca Sandell, who is going to be talking about operating cadence, predictability, prioritization, and leadership buy-in. All the things we all want to know. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Rebecca. Rebecca, off to you to start the show for us.
Hi, everybody. I really appreciate you taking time out of your days to come. Everybody hear me okay, by the way? We're good on sound? Okay, great. Thank you. I am delighted to be here. I love working with chiefs of staff, and I got my place as a mentor at Ask a Chief of Staff about a year ago now. And really, it's one of my passions to work with the next generation. I work with multiple chiefs of staff. I can tell you, Kim, I'll call you out. Kim is one of my mentees from a prior job. And so she came to join us today, and she is now a chief of staff. So I'm very excited for her in that role. But I also work with a lot of CEOs. I am teaching workshops through an organization called Vistage to CEOs and other senior leaders. And that has given me this very interesting perspective because I've been in front of about 150 CEOs in the last year in these group education sessions I'm doing. And so as I go into this workshop, I really hope to be very practical and tactical to give you things you can take away. So that's a little bit about me. I want to say a couple of things. I do have exercises that we will do through the session, but feel free to either participate or just listen, right? There's no pressure here to when I say, does anybody want to make a comment? If you feel like you're just here to learn, please just listen and take it in. But if you want to be in the conversation, I 100% encourage that. So if you want to be on camera, great. If you want to be not on camera, great. Totally flexible, right? This is up to you how you want to do this. And I will make sure I get through all the material, but if we end up going deep on something, that's all good too. Okay. One more thing I'm going to say, even before I start, is after I do a bit of an intro and level setting, we are going to do exercises, like I said, and Nia is going to post a link for a worksheet. So I recommend that you download that. It's a PDF doc. You can at least then have it maybe in a different window so that you can follow along. If you have a printer right next to you, you might want to print it and scribble some notes on it. But anyway, it's going to be a tool that you'll have to take with you after the event as well. All right, I am going to share my screen and let's get started. I'm being uncoordinated here with my Zoom sharing. Let me get more coordinated.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. We're very excited. I've got the wonderful resource and tool. Everyone knows in our community, everyone likes resources and tools. So Rebecca's created something really special for everyone here. So on that note.
Sorry, I'm still getting my
good.
self set up here. I had it set up and then now my screens aren't the way I want them. Let me switch that. Here we go. All right, I think I'm finally ready. Perfect. All right, you guys. Okay. So why are we even talking about this topic, right? Whenever you talk about any chief of staff topic, it's always about driving to better outcomes for the leader that you're working for. And operating model and cadence are no different. But there's a couple of things that we're really going to focus on to drive to those results related to operating model and cadence, which is prioritization, making sure that your principal that you work for has the ability to spend time where they can have the most impact on strategy, big picture, and highest priorities. I'm going to say the word prioritization 20, 50 times today. You'll be sick of it. But it is a really important thing for keeping your operating model and cadence to be able to just keep going in a successful way for everybody. And then the second piece we always talk about as chiefs of staff is time, saving your leader time. And whether that is because they're not doing the little things or because things are operating more efficiently, operating model and cadence is going to drive towards both of them, towards both of those. So results, prioritization, and time. We use those words a lot as chiefs of staff, but they are very, very critical in this operating model in Cadence approach. Okay, this is the big picture for anybody that's an aspiring chief of staff. This is the big picture of what a chief of staff does, right? It starts with the strategy where you've got to define the strategy, you've got to get buy-in, execution, and then ongoing prioritization, right? So your strategy stays fresh through the year. There's prioritization, use number one. Then you've got categories, business execution, running the organization, and there's that word business cadence, and then people and communication that really bring together employee engagement and culture. And at the bottom, no chief of staff job description is complete without special projects. So we've got special projects at the bottom. So you see, I mentioned Cadence here, and that includes many different things that an organization will do. But let me just throw up one really quick, very basic view of what might be in a cadence. And these are examples. This is not meant to be complete in any way, but you're going to have things you're going to do every day as a chief of staff related to action items, related to meeting prep, related to meeting coordination. You're not the EA, you're not owning it, but it is very good to know your principal's schedule. Weekly things related to planning and hosting leadership meetings, meeting with individual leaders, ongoing budget and org elements of your job, and preparing again for meetings and events, etc. I don't need to read you all of this, right? Monthly tasks related to collecting data, annual tasks related to strategic planning, annual planning, etc. So very basic, right? It's what the word says, cadence. We're going to do things on a regular basis. And I don't have quarterly in there. I don't have, every business is going to have their own cadence. And you'll hear leaders sometimes talk about the concept of rhythm of the business. I like the term cadence personally, but you'll hear that one a lot as well. Okay. Couple more things I want to level set on before we jump in. When you are a chief of staff, that's the relationship that you think of primarily, right? Me with the leader or the principal. But there are a lot of other relationships as well. And when we talk about cadence and operating model, all these other relationships are super key. So of course, you will also have a relationship with an EA if your leader has an EA. These relationships of the leaders' direct reports, whether it's VPs or C-level people or directors or whoever they are, extremely critical in many facets, but very much so in the operating model and cadence part of the business. And then other key stakeholders as well. You will have relationships with those people, whether they're somebody who is maybe the smartest product person in the company, maybe it's somebody who is driving HR decisions, maybe it's an operational person that just seems to get things done. You as a chief of staff will end up with a lot of those relationships as well. I am seeing some comments up here, Nia, and I haven't looked at them. Is there anything I should know about? And will you please stop me if there is?
Absolutely. I'm not seeing any new comments. So I think in the meantime, we are good for now.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so as we go into discussing the cadence specifics, just please keep that in mind, right? That there's a lot more to this than just you talking with your leader. Calendars are going to be super critical. Might feel like a detail, but super critical for cadence, relationships with direct reports to your leader, and then relationships with other key stakeholders. All right, one more thing I want to talk about. This is a little complicated looking, so let me walk you through it. You guys are all from different sizes of companies, some bigger, some smaller, I'm sure. Some that are in a mode that's more stable and more predictable, some in a mode that is just crazy change all the time. So let's talk about how that might create lenses with which you will look at operational approaches and look at cadences. So look at my chart here. The x-axis across the bottom, this goes from sort of a very stable, predictable company to fast-moving, rapid change company, maybe something that's in a startup mode. And so it's a continuum, right, from super stable to rapid change. The y-axis is a smaller company or organization up to a larger company or organization. This is a model, just some lenses to think about. But if you look at this bottom, right, the stable small company, you have the opportunity as a chief of staff to be plan centric, right? You have time to create a plan, time to implement a plan. You can, in a smaller company, you can take maybe a more personalized approach to how your plans work. If you go up here to a more stable, predictable environment and a larger company, you're going to need to focus on structure. You're going to need to think about predictability. And something that will become really important in this type of a model will be communications of all kinds because it's a large company. In a smaller company that's fast changing, you know, the startup where they hire their first chief of staff, you got to be prepared for frequent change all the time. Strategies even going to shift. You're going to need to do kind of rapid fire stand-up style type of communications. And then in the faster moving, larger company, people are going to beg for clarity, right? What is going on? What are our priorities? How do we stay on the same page? That needs to become kind of an extreme communication mode. So I think probably everyone on this call can relate to at least some or all even of one of these models. But it's a lens that when you think about operating model and cadence, there's not one right or wrong answer. It's just you're looking at it from a perspective that is related to your company and your role in fitting in with that company. Okay, makes sense, everybody? Are we good? All right, I see some nodding and some thumbs up. All right, let's jump into the main part of what we want to do today. And this is a set of steps that you can logically think through and work through to design and develop and keep going and operating cadence. And so all the steps, right? Listen, pick a model, develop strategy and plan with your new model, communicate, and then keep it going. I am just going to jump in. What we're going to do is go through each one, and then I'm going to give you 1 minute to just go think and write down your notes as we're going through each stage. And then I would like people, if you're up for it, to provide some feedback on what you heard, what you thought, how it applies to you, an impression, any kind of a thought about what we are going through in each of these stages. All right. So I want to get a little bit better set up here before we jump into this. I am sorry, you guys. I see you all, but I'm not seeing the chat, and I want to make sure I can see the chat. And then please do, please do just speak up or raise your hand. And Nia, if you can help me kind of see who's going to wants to make comments, I would appreciate that.
Absolutely.
All right, let's go to our first one. Listen, right? Seems pretty obvious that you want to talk to people, but when you're going to start creating an operating model or a cadence or changing an operating model or cadence, you're always going to want to understand the current state. And what you're going to want to drive to is understanding what people's pain points are. Is it things like we're constantly firefighting? And understanding what their dream scenario would be, right? How, if I was running this all smoothly, what would that look like? Now, when I go to this next step, by the way, all these slides will be set up the same way, what, who, landmines, and best practices. So on the who, you're in every single one as a chief of staff, right? In this listening stage of creating your cadence and operating model, you will be collecting information across the organization. Of course, it's really important what your principal wants. I want a certain kind of cadence. I want this kind of operating model that is measuring certain things, but it's your job as a chief of staff to then go and work with the direct reports, their leadership team, and work with the other key stakeholders that I had on that other chart. And as many levels down as you can get to really understand how the cadence is feeling in the organization, if there is one today, if there isn't one, what would be the needs for, hey, what is it that I want to be measuring? What is it that, what would help me to drive my business better? And collecting all of that information, doing that listening and learning about the organization becomes a really huge value add to your principal as you're designing the cadence and operation. All right. Landmines that you can get into in this stage of building your model. is no principal support. Now, when I say no support, they're probably saying, yep, let's have a cadence, right? Sure, we should do things in a repeatable pattern and make it predictable and etc. But are they really behind you? Are they really supporting the fact that you're going to go out there and build up a system? That can happen, right? It can happen. The kind of leader who's always on to the big next shiny object, the idea, innovation kind of leader, cadences sounds good, but it's not that exciting to them, right? When I talk to these CEOs and I ask them, tell me about your cadence and how it goes. Do you have a cadence? When I ask them that, maybe some people shoot their hand up and some go like this. And I ask them, tell me about why you didn't raise your hand or you were hesitating. And the answer usually is, well, we made a cadence, but we made it and then we don't use it because I'm, like it's too much or I'm too busy or so not having the principal support from the beginning, that's something you're going to have to work through and be discussing with your principal, maybe even calling him or her out and saying, all right, are we really going to use this or no? Right? Let's be honest with each other and how we're really going to use this. The other landmine is it can feel performative, right? It can feel like, oh, I'm going around and talking to people because I'm a chief of staff and I want to learn, right? So it's up to you to make it not feel that way. And that leads us into the best practices, right? So making this listening process feel concrete is really important. So that's where it's really key to tie it to prioritization, tie it to the big why from your principal. Why are we going to put this system in place or update this system or make us better at using this system? Why is it? Is it that we have big goals from our board for this year? Is it AI is changing the strategy of our business? Is it we are looking to make an acquisition and we have to have our ducks in a row? What is the big why? It becomes really important for you to understand that as a chief of staff and be prepared to share that with people in a way that they can understand what's in it for them. So how, if you come in and you say, I want to talk to you, head of finance about this new model, or I want to talk to you, head of sales about this new model, will it just feel like extra work for them? You don't want it to feel that way. You want to understand them to understand why an operating model and cadence will be good for them. And then finally, don't do this, behind a curtain. You want to share what you learn. It's good for the whole leadership team, other key stakeholders to really understand what the insights are that you've collected from everybody. All right. So on that note, let's take literally 1 minute to write down your own action items on the worksheet that I gave you on the listen section. But all of the best practices are listed, right? That's your checklist for how you would do this. So I'm going to just start this timer for 1 minute. And then if you're up for it, I'd love to hear from a few of you with some comments. All right, let's go.
Just going to give a quick note to everyone. I put the resource checklist in the chat. If you're not able to see it, let me know. We do ask that you download or make a copy of it, please. And then the listening section is in this checklist. Thank you.
All right. Is everybody good? Has the checklist? Is able to download that? Okay. So does anybody have a comment or thought on this part of the process of developing your cadence? Anybody want to give us a thought here?
Can you hear me? I have a question.
Yeah. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Diane.
I actually I was asked about this in an interview it wasn't a chief of staff role, but it was like a kind of a lower, like a revenue ops kind of role where, you have to develop process and implement it. And a lot of these steps are the same. And in the interview, I kept getting pressed with scenarios like, well, what if people don't follow the process? What would you do? So where in here do you see the accountability component and what levers do you recommend pulling?
Yeah, so I'm going to hold the answer to that because a lot of the next sections, all of the next sections tackle that in quite a bit of detail. Okay. Because it's a challenge, right? That is an ongoing challenge that people don't follow it. I'm going to give you lots of ways to think through that as we go through the rest of the session. All right. Has
Okay.
anybody on here gone on a listening tour, talked to people about Cadence, had feedback from your principal on what they want? Okay, let's keep going. I think there'll be more. I think as we get deeper in, hopefully these dots will start to get connected with kind of the approach for handling this. All right, let's go to, I gotta get my, all right, let's go to the next one, picking a model. So, whenever you think about an operating cadence or an operating model, people start throwing out terms like KPIs or OKRs, or if anybody's in a smaller company, you might use EOS. Does anyone use EOS? V2 Mom is one that we used when I worked at Cisco. There's many others, right? So you're going to pick a model for what is it that we're going to measure and how are we going to kind of create our strategy and tie it to the things that we're measuring, and then create our cadence from there. So again, you, as the chief of staff, you will drive the process and decision of how to get to an answer of what an operating model will be. But you're going to need buy-in to make sure it's going to work. So who will you work with? If you have operations teams, I know in smaller company, you don't necessarily have an operations team. That might be something that falls maybe in an internal shared services team or on a finance team, but you'll certainly work with the operational minded people with finance. And then of course, you'll be working with your principal for approval of this is how we are going to measure and run this organization and use it as the foundation of a cadence. All right, landmines in this situation. One of them is getting excited about something that is not what the business needs right now. Like when I learned about EOS, I thought, oh my God, I should be using this in everything I ever do, right? That might not be a great answer all the time, right? Just because I thought it was great, why is that always the right answer? It's not necessarily. The other one is being rigid, right? If you're somebody that's always used OKRs and said, all right, we need to use OKRs, but maybe that company needs to do some shorter term planning, or that team needs to be very focused on just improving some of their very key KPIs and not the sort of bigger picture OKR approach. It's just making sure that you're choosing a model that is going to fit with the situation that you're in. So that's really the first best practice, which is match a model to business needs. The second one is really important on the model, which is selecting something that is straightforward to maintain and implement, right? So if you pick something that is too complex to implement in your company, too many players, too many things to measure, no, the model's too complicated, the cadence won't work that would feel natural with that model, it won't work, right? So you need to look at your model from multiple perspectives so that you are selecting something that is straightforward to implement and maintain as you go forward over the course of a year and hopefully multiple years of having this cadence. The other thing is if you're in a bigger company and there's other parts of the company that have a way that they do operating models and cadence, see what they do. It's good to be consistent with other parts of the company in terms of way they operate things and sharing data and sharing models, etc. So even though you might think, oh, I have a great idea for doing this a different way, I think consistency can be really important if you're with other parts of the company. All right. I am going to give you guys a minute to take notes again. I lost my little 1 minute timer. Where did I put it? All right. Just get started. I'm going to time you. I'm going to find my clock and go ahead. Anybody thoughts, comments on this? Has anybody picked a model or used a model that you said this worked or didn't work for me? Anybody got a comment or a thought here? Okay, no worries. Let's keep going. The next piece is developing your strategy and plan with your new model. This is really the meat of it, right? This is where you are getting into defining what your measures will be to drive the business. Now, that's a really, really key point, and I'm going to say it a couple of times on this page. You can pick a model, you can develop your KPIs, your OKRs, whatever you're using to measure, but they need to be truly the measures that drive the business. there's a lot of landmines you can step into around that point, and I'll get to that in a minute. Again, on the who is it? It's you. You are leading. You will not come up with everything for creating the model. That needs to be from the leadership team, or some of the other key stakeholders. But you are going to be the one that will go and say, this is what we're doing. These are the kinds of measures we're going to do, all driven around the key activities, the prioritized list of the most important things that need to happen, a big why. What are you going to measure to drive to those results? All right, landmines you can step on in this situation. The first one happens a lot. I've seen it over and over in cadences and in operating models, which is people measuring activities, not results. So if you're a marketing team and you say, I'm going to send out 10 emails to drive demand gen, no, you don't want to say you're going to send out 10 emails. You want to say, what are the outcomes or the results of that? Or you're in product management and you say, we're going to have this many releases of the product. No, that's not what you want to say. You want to be saying what the outcome will be of the different releases. Are you making the product faster? Are you improving customer satisfaction, etc.? This is so important. And it's hard, right? It is hard to ask yourself with every measure that you put to a model, am I measuring the results? You do not want to measure activities. You want to measure results. Okay, I'll get off that soapbox. Another landmine is too many measures, right? You like, the leaders think, oh, I've got 10, 20 things I want to measure about my business. No, what are the key things that if they are not moving in the right direction, that leader will use it to drive the way they run the business? Very key to not have too many, to look at something and say, are you really going to use this? Maybe it's something another leader at a lower level could use if there's lots and lots of measures, but at this kind of senior leader level, it needs to be a set number, not too many. Another landmine is picking measures where you can't get the data. You might have a great idea of this is how we are going to measure something to run the business, but if you cannot get the data that you need to do that on a regular basis, on an automated basis, it's going to die out, right? This is when people get hesitant. Oh, I have a cadence, but I'm not using it. They probably aren't getting the data in an easy way. And then the last landmine is veering too far from the top priorities, right? Leaders get excited about what they're going to do, and they have lots of ideas, and maybe their ELT is giving them ideas, but you have to stay extremely focused on the top priorities. So that takes you to the best practice. Number one, ensure the measures align with the top priorities. I have exclamation points there for a reason, right? What are the top 3 or 4 or 5 things that the company or team or organization needs to do? You have to make sure the measures are directly aligned to that. Keep it simple. Make sure people can understand what the measures are, what the model is, how it all comes together with the priorities. What's that overarching strategy? How does it drill down to top priorities? What are the key things we measure? That's it. Keep it simple. Automate data collection and reporting. If you cannot automate it, you're probably not going to stick with measuring it and being consistent with making sure all of the leaders are actually driving their teams, or your senior leaders driving the organization with that data. So automation is key. If you can't get the data that you want in an automated way, that's why it's important to have relationships with the other stakeholders, whether it's operations or finance, to figure out how can we set up a way that this data can come into these reports in an automated way. Another big area to talk about on best practices is cross-functional initiatives. It's a very big chief of staff topic, right? That you are a cross-functional, owner of things as a chief of staff, and you're one of the few people in the organization that is looking cross-functionally. And when you are developing your strategy and plan, it's a great place to put some cross-functional initiatives in and assign co-owners. So if you've got a couple of people that need to work on a cross-functional initiative, make them jointly accountable for that. A lot of times that doesn't happen when you're putting together your plans, but this is a fantastic way to drive co-ownership of some important initiatives. And the cross-functional ones could be some of the biggest, most important initiatives that you're doing. So don't be afraid to have co-owners, even though people are always like, oh, you should have one owner, has to be, one throat to choke, or one person to open the champagne when it's good. I like the co-owner model a lot for very like boots on the ground, getting things done. And then finally, when you're developing your plan, this is when you want to really put your cadence in place. When are the reviews going to happen? Is it mid-quarter, end of quarter? Is it monthly? Do you touch on things in a weekly meeting with the leadership team? How does that work in your organization? Prepare that now and prepare how you're going to be communicating about the model, the plan, the cadence, etc. All right. Do you guys want a minute, or should I keep to write some notes down, or should I keep going? Anyone? All right, I'll keep going. I'll keep going. Okay. No, oh, sorry. Next one is communicate. This is where the question that came up earlier, a piece of this starts to come in, another piece of this really starts to come in. When you spend all of this energy, right? It's a lot of energy to create the model, to take the strategy, drill down, do the measures, get everybody on board, making sure it's measuring the business, automate things, all the stuff I just talked about. It's a lot of work. How do you make people know what's going on and believe in it? So communications is a really, really important part of this whole cadence and operations thing. Because back to the things I said right in the very beginning, the big why, right? Why is this important? Why is this cadence what we need to be doing to drive the company? And then your prioritization. So how do you make sure that everybody on the team, whether it's a small team and it's a personalized approach, like I talked about in the beginning, or it's a big team and you need to be talking to 3, 4, 5 levels of people, this is like, I cannot say enough about the communications. And I always say in this area of cadence and this kind of big picture of running the team, it's impossible to over communicate about this stuff. So first stage is going to be gaining the buy-in, but then also retaining the buy-in. I'll talk a little bit about that here, but then in that next area, that keep it going, I will talk more about retaining that buy-in. So number one, again, who? Once again, it's you. As the chief of staff, you may have a comms person or comms team or somebody who's a good writer that you can work with, etc. But you're going to be the orchestrator on this comms. What do you think, what stories do you think need to be told from your leader, from maybe the other leaders, the direct reports that are under your leader? What stories do you think need to be told? How do you make it come to life? Not just this is what we're doing and you should do it, you're going to like it. Not, what are some success stories of we improved a metric? What are some approaches that leaders are taking with their teams to get measures to improve, or to even get their teams to understand it? Tell those stories. So there's a lot of angles that you can go to, whether it's the whole big picture, whether it is pieces of the plan, pieces of the operating model to share with the whole organization. In one of my organizations, we had the finance people come and tell the story at the end of every quarter. So you were hearing it from a totally different voice, not from the leadership teams at all. You were hearing it from one of the stakeholders from finance, as an example. Okay. Also in that same job, we also taught everybody about the whole organization, not just their one silo that they sat in, so that when they looked at the bigger picture, they understood why other pieces of the organization were doing what they were doing and why their priorities were important to be paired up with the priorities of the team that you're on. So there's many, many ways you can communicate this. So landmines, I think I touched on these, not enough clarity, right? So there's lots of people in the organization. It's easy for them not to be clear. You write all this stuff down. If you're a finance person, the stuff in sales might not make sense, or you're an engineer, stuff in marketing might not make sense. How do you get everyone in the team enough clarity to understand what the strategy, model, things that are measured, cadence, et cetera, what they're about. And then that just leads to not enough applicability is another landmine. If you don't want anyone in the organization to look at the plan and say, that doesn't apply to me. And guess what? That happens in every single organization, that people think it doesn't apply to them. And that is part of why you have to keep communicating from all these different angles to get people to really see themselves in this plan. All right, best practices. I think I've mentioned a lot of these already, but always think about and communicate the why. Should ask yourself every time, are people going to understand why this is important? Talk to the audience. How does this apply to me? And then, so that's the general comms, but there's also a whole nother angle, which is working with all of the other leaders that report to your principal, and asking them, what do they need to gain buy-in from their teams? Does this plan talk to their team? If it doesn't, and the cadence, just feels like work for them, doesn't feel like it's useful, then that's not working, right? So what does each of the leaders need? That is it's a best practice. It's time consuming, right, to get on all of everybody else's calendars and talk to them, but totally worth it, because they're the ones that will be bringing the cadence and the plan and the operating model down into their teams. And then the last one is go multi-channel, right? Don't just do it written, do it with some videos, do it live, do it recorded, have big stories, small stories, etc. And so I think I've beaten this to death now, the communication, but you cannot over communicate about this. All right, let me take a break. Does anybody have any questions before I go on to this keep it going part? Okay, let's keep going then. Last one. This is, I think, the hardest part of an operating model in a cadence, which is success over the long term. How do you set yourself up? Maybe now at this time of year, if you operate on a calendar year, you're starting to say, what are we going to do next year? Right? What is 2026 going to look like? So it all sounds great when you're putting it together in fourth quarter of 2025 for 2026, but is it going to have staying power for the entirety of that next year? That is a big challenge. Okay. So let's dig into that. Once again, you are the key driver of this. You have to be the boots on the ground, the eyes and ears, all of the classic chief of staff things to keep a cadence and an operating model going. Again, I talked in the very beginning about, not having buy-in from the principal. This is where principal buy-in is extremely important. Okay. Your leader has to be constantly working with their leaders to say, we set up these measures. This is how we run the business. We use these measures to run the business. Don't run it a different way. And I will drill into that some more as we go into the landmines and best practices. And then again, the leadership team as well, they have to be on that same page. So you as the eyes and ears, you have to be constantly monitoring. Is this still happening across the whole principal and the leadership team as well? All right, landmines. Number one, fading interest, right? Oh God, I got another cadence meeting I have to go to. I'm getting asked to update my data. I have to fill in a report or for some mid-quarter meeting or end of quarter meeting. Like that, it's extremely common. People get tired of doing this, right? Number two, not feeling relevant, right? It's all right, well, we had some priorities. I don't know if this applies to me. It doesn't feel that relevant to me. That's something that tends to happen over time, right? They might agree to it in the beginning, but markets change, things change, customers change. Suddenly, middle of the year, people are feeling like this whole thing we do twice a quarter, it's not relevant to me anymore. Another landmine, I just beat this one to death, but under communicating, just not keeping people up to date on what's happening on a weekly basis, a monthly or quarterly or whatever your cadence is, under communicating. And then, here, this is a big one, that behind the scenes, priorities change in somebody's head, maybe one of the leadership team's heads, or they do a skunk works project. We'll just do this over here. It's okay, right? That is a big landmine that can blow up a cadence, blow Lower prioritization, Tiffany, I see you smiling and nodding. I think we've all lived through this, right? Story of our lives, somebody said. And that is a landmine you have to be really careful not to have happen in your org. It will always happen. How do you then manage that? All right, let me give some best practices around. This one is getting a lot of, yes, people feel this. All right. The first thing, again, I'm going back to the principle. If they are not using the cadence and the measures and the processes and the communications and everything that's been set up to actually run the business, it's not going to work, right? So it is up to you as the chief of staff to be constantly working with that leader to say, this is what we're doing for Cadence. How do you feel about it? Are you telling your leadership team that this is not optional, that this is how we run the business? Number one, right? And as you know, right, as the chief of staff, sometimes you have to be the one that tells your leader stuff they don't want to hear. This might be something you have to tell them they don't want to hear, but you have to tell them. Otherwise, it's going to be all skunks. The next one, keep up with prioritization and limit priorities, right? If you have 10 or 20 priorities, that's not priorities. So what really are the top few priorities of the business? You have to keep up with that, because what you decide on, December 15th, 2025 might not feel like a priority in July 2026. So the thing is to keep up with changes. This worked really well in one of the companies that I was in as a chief of staff. Every single time we did a review, there was a process to change something, right? Do you feel like one of these measures you're not using it like you want to run your business? It's just not giving you data that is really helpful to run your business. Great, cross it off. Let's not use that one anymore. Is there something better that you should be measuring? Or priorities? Do you feel like the things that you're measuring and using to run your business and drive this cadence, do you feel like they don't align to the priorities anymore? Do we need to change priorities? What changed? So revisiting that as a really important part of your cadence is the only way to keep this working, right? If you don't revisit, it's just going to fade. It's just not going to feel relevant as you get further into the year. Okay. So this, change management, and then that takes you back to communications, right? Continuing to make sure that everybody understands, hey, we've had this little shift and why, we're going to do the business growth this way, but here's some changes that have happened in the market. We're going to approach it more this way. We're going to open this different market with what's happening in China or with tariffs or whatever, right? Stuff changes. You have to have a big, strong change management process to keep up with that. Okay. Principal giving you air cover to drive, right? If your principal is not saying all the time, I use this to run the business, and then saying to you, you have got my backing to go push everybody to keep doing this, it won't work, right? I think everybody's probably had a principal where you felt like you didn't have enough air cover. It's not comfortable, right? When you are going and asking for things and leaders are like, I got other priorities. I'm going to go do my other project over here. So again, just retaining that cadence and retaining that open conversation with your principal about that air cover. Constant reviews, you want to review with the people that are really driving the business, but checking in with key stakeholders, checking in with maybe some of the doers on the team and making sure they understand what's relevant, talking to them about what they're working on and getting some just little pieces of info to say, is this really drilling all the way down into the organization? Gives you great data to go back to your leader with and say, hey, I went and talked to 3 of the development teams, or I talked to a couple of the different sales teams. This is what they're saying. And see, is it working to drill it down? And then how do you bring things back up as well to bring into the change process, et cetera. And then the last one, keep things moving even when the organization is busy. It's easy to say, oh, we have our big event of the year in June. Everybody's super busy getting ready for the big event. Your job as a chief of staff is to not let the cadence drop. even when everybody feels like they're super busy. Maybe you got to compromise a little, right? Hey, I'll get some written reports out to you guys in advance and we'll keep the meeting short to go over everything. But don't let the ball drop. It's easy to just let it go. We've been super busy, and then it's very hard to pick it back up. Okay, that's that list of best practices. Does anybody else? I saw some nodding, and there was definitely some comments here, right? Tiffany, I spend more than 50% of the time dealing with the landmines of a tiny team. What do I do? Is this normal? You know, it is normal, unfortunately, right? Which is why I can list all the landmines. But I think, if you try and be hyper focused on prioritization and why, I find that, like asking people over and over, like, is this in the top priorities, what you're doing? Can prevent some of the sort of sideways movement to say, and then suddenly there's a fire because something that is the top priority isn't being paid attention to. So just kind of hyper focus and clarity on top priorities is where I generally like to start on that. I have a background as a product manager, and so prioritization, like you live and die by it, right? Because if your engineering team is off doing, I thought I'd make the UI better over here today, and you're like, no, that wasn't the top priority. So it kind of becomes a way of life, and that has translated for me really well into my chief of staff jobs. Okay, does anybody have any comments on this? Because this is the biggest one, really, right? The rest of it you can kind of drive and do yourself and, bring other people along, but this one you got to count on the team to be with you.
I think the pushback I got was like, what if they say no, it's not a priority? Like, what if you're getting the pushback? How, I mean, obviously you're with all those other best practices, but if a leader down the line says, oh, it's not a priority, or even just someone even further down the chain says, oh, it's not a priority to me, how do you go about that? Like if you're getting feedback from the operators, for example.
If somebody is doing something that they think is important, I think understanding why they think it is important, because there probably is a nugget of something in there that is useful. So how do you ferret that out, right? You don't want to just shut somebody down because they're doing something that seems off script. Why, right? And a lot of times, there is, like I said, there is like a little nugget of something that you can then say, oh, I see where you're coming from or going. Let's get a few people to talk about that, rather than it being like, hey, you're off script, you're doing it wrong. Kind of trying to ferret that out. I don't know if would give you a different approach, Diana, or that's not the kind of situation that you've run into.
Yeah, I think this one's probably pretty basic, but it's like, putting in the data. If you don't have data, then like the classic Salesforce and the salespeople aren't putting in the data, then then that rolls all the way up to, okay, well, then we don't have good visibility. We don't have transparency into results or activities and effectiveness. And I think, I don't know, it was a strange interview because, there's only so much you can do, right? In any role, because if someone's being like, when they're just not doing their job, when we know these things are critical to just running the business and their normal cadences, and they're pushing back on those types of things. It's like, what do you do?
Yeah, I do think there's certain things that just have to come from the top. When I run my CEO workshops, there's a couple of times that I get on a soapbox talking to the CEOs and I say, this has to come from you, right? But my session, by the way, is talking to them about how to use a chief of staff to help them run their company better, right? So I'm talking to them about all of you, right? And I say to them, there are certain things that have to come from you. This is one of them. For example, Diana, right? If people are not putting stuff in Salesforce, sales leadership has to be the one that says either you do this or you don't have a job. And so that is an example where there are just certain things that are super key to how you're going to run the business. We got to collect data about our customers. You as the salespeople are the only one that know it. You either put it in or you get a low performance rating and you go on a performance plan. Like it has to be that straightforward and simple. And you have to not be afraid as a leader to do that. And yeah, so there's definitely some of this, like I see a question. Yeah, there's definitely some of these things that have to come from the leader, right? Like in general, you guys, this is how we run our business. We run it with a cadence, we run it with measuring certain things. And if you aren't participating this way, well, we're going to be talking about that because you are going to participate this way. But that's where all of this, you have to listen, you have to not be afraid to not, that's the wrong way to say it. You have to encourage change where it makes sense. And then you want to make sure everybody is aligned on some of these, the cross-functional functional initiatives, the priorities, the whys, etc. So it's kind of a system of top down, has to come top down, air cover for the chief of staff that's driving all of this, but then making people feel heard through this whole process. So
Thanks for
it's that
validating that.
EQ thing, right? It's that EQ thing that always gets talked about with chief of staff too, right? Is you got to read the room and say, this is either going well or it isn't. And if it's not, you have to talk about it and say, why isn't this working for everybody?
Thanks for
Right.
validating that. That was my response, but he kept pressing me and I was like, am I missing something? Like,
No,
you
you're
can
not
only do
missing
so
something.
much
You are
as
not.
an, yeah, as any sort of
Like I can
individual
provide the
contributor.
data and the processes and the approach and
Yeah.
everything, but if you are not giving me air cover, it's not going to work. Okay, I see a question here. We're on a smallish team that's helped with pushback from some ELT members on Cadence, letting them see the why not. Poor reporting, surprises. Yep, no principle like surprises. Yeah, I mean, that is the thing with a good cadence is you don't have surprises. Let me show one more slide. Actually, before I dig into the rest of those questions, because right, I'm going to actually show a couple I lied. We started by saying, here's your business cadence, but after everything I talked about today, business cadence touches every single part of the company. And so don't be afraid to say, like, hey, this is actually foundational to everything we do. Our business execution, it affects our people, it's tied to communications, etc. And then I just made a little sample cadence, right? If you haven't done one of these before, it's just drop thoughts into a spreadsheet. Your strategy and planning timing, your company meetings, when are people getting together? And so when can you communicate about things or when can you work on things? If it's a leadership team meeting, or set up some cross-functional meetings, work with the ELT, whether it's staff meetings or offsites. So just kind of core things. And then I always do my cadences by putting the key events for the company at the top. So when are board meetings? When are your big industry events? Do you have a couple of in-person all company get-togethers, or how does your company work? Put how your company works at the top. And then you can figure out your cadences sort of leading up to some of those big events and leveraging some of those big events. Happy to share this or hope you're screenshotting if this helps you kind of start thinking about that. But the last thing I want to say, and it's the other page in the worksheet, is, a lot of times a chief of staff says, how do I measure myself as a chief of staff? And when you're thinking about the benefits of cadence, it's things you can measure yourself against. So on that second page, just, if you're a chief of staff or thinking about being a chief of staff, it's a great conversation with either in an interview or with the leader of, this is how I think I can be measured. So I talked about prioritization and time up front as two of the most important things to think about. Well, measure yourself against that. Am I creating clarity? Have I reduced firefighting? Or do I have ways to reduce firefighting? Am I optimizing time for the principal and for their leadership team? Am I creating reuse, repeatability? Am I simplifying things? Is there predictability, right? Back to this, nobody likes surprises. So is it predictable how things are operating? So is there consistency where everyone on the team is pulling in the same direction? And so there's not firefights, skunk works projects, etc. And then are you creating transparency to deliver that predictability? And then the cross-functional enablement. I like this phrase, encoded shared responsibilities, right? You can give shared responsibilities, but if you give leaders measures that they need to report on together, that encodes it, their shared responsibilities, and is part of their measuring their performance. And then cross-functional enablement, it gives accountabilities not only to the leader, but cross-peer accountability as well. So these are some thoughts on how you can measure yourself on if you are providing a good cadence and a good operating model to your company. So that is, that's kind of a summary of everything we talked about. I want to go back. I think somebody asked about extreme communications for large companies with lots of change. I talked a little bit about the multiple perspectives or multiple things you're talking about. So in a large company where I did this, we had weekly regular communications that were done on a Slack channel. We had monthly summaries of all of the kind of successes and key points of the business. We had official quarterly communications. We talked to people at the lowest level of the team to say, how's it going for you? Oh, you have a success story. Let's tell it. We did little tiny things ad hoc on Slack all the time. We had very, sort of creative all hands. So it wasn't just kind of reporting out on things. We brought in outside speakers to help people understand maybe some of the big why parts of what we were doing. So we just got very creative, and we asked a bunch of different people, like, what would be helpful for you and your team? And then we had a cadence for communication in addition to a cadence for how we were running the company. They aligned, right? It was part of that. I could have put it on my sample cadence, right? The communications part of it. I don't know if that helps, but Lauren, if you ever want to talk about that, let me know. You can always ping me to brainstorm on that as well. All right. I don't know if I missed any of the other questions, but I know we're out of time. So I just want to say thank you. This is me. I would love to connect with any and all of you. I'm a mentor and Ask a Chief of Staff, so ping me anytime on Slack. If you're not an Ask a Chief of Staff, feel free to ping me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect. And thank you so much for everything.
Thank
Take
you
care, everybody.
so much, Rebecca, and thank you everyone for joining. We'll send out the recording as well as a copy of the slides and the resource again. This was so great. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And if you have any questions, please reach out to the one and only Rebecca Sundell. Have a good one, everyone.
Thanks, you guys. All
Bye.
right.